All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for another track knowledge sharing session. I'm Karen Kierstead with the Association of Nova Scotia Museums, and we are coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I want to say, as always, we are just so grateful to be living in this beautiful land and sharing it and learning together. Um, with me today is Eileen Coady from the Margaree Salmon Museum. And so I'm just going to ask Eileen to introduce herself and her museum a little bit to us. And yeah, let us know about the connection it has to the river and natural environment.
Okay, thanks, Karen. My name is Eileen Coady. I'm a board member for probably about 8 years now with the Margaree Salmon Museum. And that is located in Northeast Margaree um, in Cape Breton in Inverness County. And we are situated on the Margaree River, which is a Canadian heritage river here in Nova Scotia, one of two, and one of only 41, I believe, across the country.
Wow.
So the museum was established in 1965. It was established to celebrate and acknowledge the wonderful salmon angling history of the Margaree River. It was established by residents and people who were longtime fishers on the river, anglers, and men and women. And it was established so that they could um, celebrate with a bit of a story the history from probably around the 1920s onward when it became an established salmon angling river, although there had been fishing done prior to that. And so we house a collection of artifacts, rods, reels, flies, salmon flies, and a lot of photographs of anglers who've come from various parts of the States and other parts of Canada, and also local guides who were uh, part of that wonderful story and often shared a real connection with the fishermen. So from 1965 onward, with the exception of 2020, when COVID hit hard, we have been open and we're open seasonally between June and October, mid-June to mid-October.
Hmm.
And
Cool.
so, sorry, go ahead.
I just learned a few new things that I wasn't aware of. Yeah, the river status, that's pretty great. So, I mean, I don't think it's a big leap, but for your organization, did anything in particular lead the museum to start thinking about environmental impact as part of your interpretation, or do you feel like was it always there? Like, how did you get to where you are now?
I think it's just a natural connection.
Mhm.
When it was established in 1965, the river was still had an abundant supply of fish, probably less than it had in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, but it was still a salmon fishing river where fishermen came and caught and kept their fish. But over time, by the 1970s, there was a recognition, and certainly by the 1980s, that the fish stocks were just not there as they had been, and something had to be done in terms of conservation. So the establishment over time there of catch and release became part of the angling story in on the Margaree. And I think our staff, and I don't pretend to be as well informed as they have been over the years, but they were connected to the river in such a way, either through family or through Department of Fisheries officers who were from the area. They were very well aware of the story and the issues facing the river. So in that way, I think the story that the museum would tell, and very informally often, but the way it would be told would recognize the fact that things changed over time with the river.
Mhm, mhm. So thinking of where you are now, I was actually just having this conversation before our call with someone else. There are, um, some museums that we've been talking to that say like it's really hard to have a conversation about environmental sustainability or climate justice with their visitors, and they want to, but they're not really sure how to approach that conversation. So how does your museum approach that with visitors? Is it something that like is really woven through programs or like tour scripts, things like that, or is it more informal, would you say?
I would say that it's more informal in the sense that our staff are celebrating what we have as our history and our story, but it's, as you say, it's kind of woven into the conversation because time has changed the way our river supports salmon fishing.
Mhm.
Fishermen who come still love to come and still love to fish there, but they are recognizing that it's a different it's a different stock now. Sorry, in terms of the numbers, there's just not the possibility of catching and keeping. But then you look at the
Mhm.
walls and you see, at one time, there would be five big fish on a branch, and the fisherman and the guide were celebrating their catch of the day. So
Right.
it's a different world. So I think probably our staff are more likely to be having an informal conversation. They are acknowledging, how things have changed, and depending on the visitor too, how deeply you get into
Mm.
some sort of a conversation on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Uh,
So I know that you guys participate in World Rivers Day. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means in terms of, activities or programs and yeah, just your involvement and then how that again connects back to the museum's raison d'etre.
right. Um, World Rivers Day is an international day. It's celebrated on the fourth Sunday of September, and it's to acknowledge uh, the role of water in our world, and to celebrate the role of rivers and other water bodies in our stories. So we are not the establishers of World Rivers Day in Margaree. We participate in it. There are several other organizations in the Margarees connected with um, river salmon fishing and river conservation. One of them is the Margaree Salmon Association,
Mhm.
and they, together with the provincial fish hatchery, which is located in the Margarees, have kind of established it, and we have become involved in it. And it's it's not it's still evolving here. It's still a rather simple celebration. It's an outdoor event. As I said, it's on a Sunday in September, so usually it's a very nice time of the year to be in Margaree, and we have a lot of fishermen at that time. So other Margaree organizations are invited to be part of this event. It includes a barbecue. It includes um, in the last year events that would take families, children down to the river for a little bit of um, kind of a science program related to conservation or acknowledging the salmon stocks in the river, and
Mhm.
and all of the organizations that are there are invited to participate in just a few minutes of a presentation on what their organization is doing in connection with the river and
Mhm.
the and salmon fishing. So for the museum, we speak about our programs for that summer, summer, fall, and also kind of speak about our connections and how we see our involvement in celebrating that day. Um, the day I think is going to evolve in 2025 because last year we did a family fun day on the same weekend. We did it on Saturday, and then World
Yeah.
First Day was on Sunday. And we recognized that we had a wonderful attendance from the community for our fun day because it was
Mhm.
fun. And
Yeah.
the World Rivers Day on Sunday was a little more um, adult. It was a little more
Okay.
formal in its setup. So we're thinking that this year we would like to combine them and
Mm.
you know some of the fun activities that we had included in our day, and we had like free entrance to the museum that day,
Yeah.
and we would kind of connect with the maybe the more formal part of that Rivers Day was celebrating, and I think that would be valuable to both. I think
Mhm.
we would perhaps have a more inclusive kind of program that way. So that's where we're going with it. But it's something that is certainly important because you know our river and the connections that we have taken over. We have taken over the kind of responsibility for the designation of the Canadian Heritage River at the museum in the last
Okay.
year and a half. And so in that way, we are quite connected to the valuing of the river.
Mm. That's why my mind is kind of spinning like, "Oh, that's really cool." Like, what's I wanna know what's involved in that, and, like, this just sounds great. I think, yeah, a couple points that you mentioned. I love that you just kinda jumped on board with something that was already happening, right? Like, you didn't say, okay, well, now we have to come up with our own unique solution for this. Like this is happening in our community. We can get involved with that, and then we can really contribute to it and see how it can grow and evolve. Like there's so much value in that. And again, like thinking back to conversations that we have with museums who want to get involved, but they're not really sure what to do. I think that's a really easy lesson that like look to see who is doing what, right? And connect in with them. I am really curious about the Heritage River designation. So what do you have to do as like the steward of that or to maintain that designation?
Well, initially, it's a federal designation, but it's under the provincial under a provincial focus now. But there is still a connection to the federal. Um,
Mhm.
there is not a lot of funding support for the river in terms of that designation, but it certainly is a valuable designation to have, and it speaks to the stewardship of the river over the years and its connection historically and you know economically to the area.
Okay.
And in Nova Scotia, the other river that is a heritage river is the Shelburne River, which is in inland. Sorry, it's in a more isolated area of Shelburne County,
Mhm.
whereas the Margaree River is a river that has communities all along it. So in our area, it is a river that you know has had a long history prior to settler communities with the Mi'kmaq, and
Mhm.
also a strong connection to the various settler communities along the river. What we have to do, we have picked up some responsibilities from the former society that ran it, and they include the setup each year of plaques along the river that speak to its designation and show how they include an archival photo and the map and just some information so that um, all 13 are along the watershed in various places. And, so it gives people an understanding that this is something to acknowledge and recognize. Um,
Mm.
Other responsibilities, we're still just in the second year of this uh, transition. So I expect we may pick up some other responsibilities or do some other projects um, with connection to that status. And the other thing that we have been involved in this spring is just a revision of a geomap project that was done by the province, excuse me.
It's okay.
And sorry, a geomap that was done federally, and the uh, the various spots that were connected to our portion of that mapping had to be revised and photos improved on, and we have done that, and it's presently in Ottawa being reviewed, I guess.
Well, that's very neat. Um, the next question that I was going to ask you, I feel like you've already touched on this a fair bit, Eileen, but thinking of your interpretation that you offer, obviously it's just super connected to the environment and the river. Do you want to say anything about how it's evolved to reflect the changing environment and the changing realities of the river and the fish stock? Anything else that's coming to mind?
Well, I have to say, when I was doing phase one of track this year, we had to do the interpretation pillar. Um, these questions, they were challenging, I found, and I was not sure, what I would be able to say to support some of my answers on behalf of the museum with the others who were working on it with me. And but in terms of how we're acknowledging climate change in terms of our ongoing story, I'm not sure that some of our interpretation um, is up to date as it's always a work in progress, and we have things that we need to improve on. But sometimes just in sharing the information that we have, I think as a museum we can reflect, the fact that, if it's I was trying to think of other examples aside from fishing, but certainly in terms of our fishing story, our story of salmon angling on the river, it's the impact of climate change on stocks, the impact
Mm,
of um, how the climate year to year, a severe weather event impacts the banks of the river. It
mm,
impacts, even just how people can access a certain area of the river. Um, but I was trying to think, in terms of farming, the impact on crops, how that would change, how our story has changed in connection with farming over the last 100 years or so. And I was thinking in terms of transportation, uh, how, I think we can draw in things like, the use of fossil fuels, various parts of the province, uh, how coal was once the king, and how, changing times and changing views of what's out there change. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question. I think we're still in the throes of working on our interpretation, but
yeah.
often what we can do verbally is reflect on how things have evolved and largely it's impacted by climate.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the nature of the beast, right? Like, this is such an actively changing situation. Like you said, the weather is seems crazier every year sometimes,
Mhm.
right? Every once in a while we have an easier year, but um, yeah, it makes sense that it's just going to be an ongoing thing for
Yeah.
foreseeable
And
future.
and oftentimes our visitors drop into the museum to find out, how is the fishing this year on the river, and
Oh yeah.
last how is the fishing, and last year between August, 1st of August and the end of September, for a period of time there, the river was closed, or a portion of the river was closed to fishing because
Oh,
of the heat and the low level of the water. So, I mean, that is just part of your conversation. And
right.
it probably, for some people coming from different part of Canada or some part of Europe even, it's our acknowledgement that, our river is severely impacted by, long-term heat, or, a lack of rainfall, or the
Mhm.
lack of rain, or lack of snow the previous winter that would have built up the
Right.
water levels. So, those kinds of current things happening often are part of, your staff conversation with visitors.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Um, do you think that you've seen any, like, really visible either challenges as you've been exploring, climate change and the impact with the river, or some opportunities that have come up? I mean, the World Rivers Day, that partnership, that sounds like that's a nice opportunity. Is there anything else you'd wanna say on that front, though?
Well, just probably little things that you're doing within the museum in terms of recycling. Your general approach to um, um, even flowers in an urn or a pot. You may have some edible plants put in there just to kind of reflect on the fact that climate is impacting so many things, and maybe
Mhm,
even in terms of your decor or your recycling. You're not ignoring it, because not every part of Canada, not every part of the States is even doing as much recycling as we tend to do here in Nova Scotia, or composting.
mhm.
And
Yeah, that's a good reminder.
I think, the little things that you can do, when you are overwhelmed by some of the big things,
Mhm,
maybe that spurs a conversation. You have cherry tomatoes in a planter with your other flowers, and you're just kind of acknowledging that, you know, uh, a food plant is part of what you do. I don't know, that's just a little example, I guess.
no, I love that. My One of the things my mom always taught me was, like, little things can add up to really big impacts, and I maybe I don't know why, but, like, lately that's really been speaking to me, right? That it's that collective, that everybody, if everybody is doing these little things, then that does really start to add up and send a nice clear message to people that, like, this is important and we do need to pay attention. So I love that. Um,
And not everybody who comes to our museum has a real knowledge of salmon fishing. So,
right.
we try to tell that story, but what may resonate with them is, the little thing that we're doing that kind of speaks to an environmental consciousness, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you noticed, like, thinking of those visitors, have you noticed any changes in how they engage with either, like, exhibits or programs, or engage with your staff because you've woven that environmental consciousness through everything that you're doing?
Well, I have to say I'm not I'm not a member of
Right.
the board, so I'm not there day to day, um, in front of the, in front of our visitors. But on occasion, I'm in and I'm working around, and I might either overhear a conversation or I'm part of a conversation. I think they're often, when they're in our area, are very our visitors are much more conscious of. I think generally our visitors are more conscious of environmental issues.
Mhm,
I think they want to know about um, how that might be impacting our area. So their
mhm.
question might be about the river. Is your river lower or than usual, or maybe we've just gone through a hurricane event, or they've heard about that prior to their visit, and so they're interested in those kinds of conversations. So it's, again, probably rather informally. It's not something that we got a display on at this time anyway, but they I think the knowledge and the appreciation of visitors, for the most part, recognizes that climate change is out there and it impacts just about everything.
Mm. It sounds like they see you as a really great resource for that information. Like, that's if they're stopping in, right, to ask about water levels and fish stocks and things like that, is that you said you've been around for 8 years, that's right. So, is that something that you would say, like, has been consistent through your time with the organization? Or people like, I wonder if that's something that has changed, with from when the museum started and as it's changed over the years. Has that sort of appreciation or recognition, I wonder if that's been there?
I have to say, the individuals who've been on staff um, in the museum here, and you may be aware of some of them, they were long serving.
Yes.
And so we had, from the time I was quite young and would drop into the museum, the women mostly
Yeah.
uh, were fabulous community people who really loved the area, loved the river. And so they spoke passionately about the area. And fishermen who were from away often came to see them annually, just
Aw,
because they were great ambassadors for the area and did have
right.
some kind of inside knowledge of how things were going with fishing, or the catches and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Two that come to mind: Frances Hart was a dedicated staff person with the museum for over 40 years, and um, um, Bernadine Marple, who just retired
Mhm.
last year, was close to 30 years, and some of
Wow.
their time overlapped. But those women would speak with great, uh, you know, um, community knowledge of what was happening. So I think there's always been that connection to the natural environment here, and
Mm.
so the museum, um, it was just part of what we did to know about the river, and how the fish stocks were doing that year, and how the fishermen were doing. So I think that has been a part of it, but it probably, and I hope it is, continuing to be a strong part of our story.
Mm. I love that framing of the museum as the, like, river's ambassador. I think that's just a really beautiful
Oh,
that's a
those
beautiful thing.
ladies were, yeah, definitely.
Yes. And the but I think, like, that speaks to a whole host of other things around, making sure that our staff are supported and cared for, and that they can stick around for a long time to build those relationships in the community, because that's so, so important, that consistency, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely. Um, I have one more question for you. We'll see if I can stump you on this one. Thinking about museums that don't have this kind of strong and natural connection to their environment or environmental themes, what advice would you give to them if they're just starting to think about, okay, we want to incorporate climate justice, environmental sustainability, we want to incorporate some of this into our interpretation and into our operation? What would you say to those museums?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert, and I would, not pretend to know what works for another museum. But I'm just thinking, I think if if you if if you could try to think of um, what connection you could make, your museum could make, either maybe with a storyboard, maybe with just some sort of a slogan, some place in your museum that kind of would acknowledge that as a museum you're thinking about climate justice. Um, and maybe like your mother, Karen, to start small, to do some simple things that are comfortable for your staff, comfortable for the board to move forward on. Because if it's too big a project, maybe it's a little overwhelming along with everything
Mm,
else that has to be done. But
right.
you know little things that reflect on your museum, which I don't know, but which could be uh, helpful to to having some sort of a conversation with visitors. And maybe
Mhm,
it's something even that you could work with if you have children's programming, which unfortunately we're still working on. We don't have that. Sometimes working with from a children's perspective could maybe create a little activity that speaks to moving forward on this.
mhm,
I think as a salmon museum, we probably it's just part of our being that we have to be so conscious of the river and conservation. That's always been part of our story. But I think um, other museums will probably, if they think about it, come up with something that they could do to to move forward on the issue.
mm. Thank you, Eileen. That's good advice.
Hopefully,
Well, that was the end of my questions, I think. Um, is there anything else that you wanted to share? I really appreciate this spending this time with me and just talking this through. And please do keep us in the loop about how World Rivers Day changes for this year. It sounds like it's going to be a really great weekend and opportunity.
fourth Sunday in September. So if you're in Margaree, you're most welcome.
Mark the calendar. Yep. Put the family in the car. Very cool. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again, Eileen. Really appreciate it. Hopefully this is helps to spark some ideas for everybody that watches it.
I hope so.